Before I start, you're from Morgan.
Hi,
Um,
Morgan, I'm sorry.
no worries. I'm Morgan. I'm based out of Atlanta right now. I was a participant in the University of Georgia's undergraduate Inside Out program, and I am planning to start law school this fall.
Great. Okay.
Great. All right. Thanks, hello, everybody. I am Tara Gilligan. As Lori said, I teach at Lafayette College, and I teach in the women's gender and sexuality studies at Lafayette College. I've been there for about 2 decades, but I've been teaching Inside Out since about 2019. I had my training in 2018. So I teach in a county jail, the Northampton County Jail. I teach strictly on the women's unit, which is a challenge. And it's actually something that I gave a previous talk about, thinking about issues of retention, especially on a women's unit. I find that our numbers are just really low. So that's one of the reasons for the challenges that we have there. Um, but I also have been kind of dying for there to be a discussion about women in the prisons and jails and the kind of programming there is for it. Hearing all of your brief bios, I feel like I'd like to be taking this session from any of you. And so I hope that what I'm going to be doing is just facilitating some conversation. I'm really eager to hear from everybody. I have a feeling that some of what I want to say is going to be old hat to some of you, but some of you have not taught in a women's prison before and maybe haven't come from a feminist perspective. And so I'm hoping that some of those things that I say will be valuable kind of to set the stage for all of us. I shared a Google Doc presentation, but I'm also going to share my screen. Lori and I did a test run on that, so let me see if that works again. Give me one moment. I always find Zoom to be a little bit clunky. Okay, so these are the issues that I want to kind of talk through a bit. As I said, I want to run through some issues, not assuming that we all have exactly the same background. So maybe this can kind of locate us in the same space together, and then we can do as much conversation about this as possible. The things that I thought would make a good background were, first of all, thinking about who are the women in our jails and prisons. We always hear that jails and prisons were designed for men, and I want to think a little bit more about what that means and what that means for programming. I'm not going to talk a ton about this third topic, what special challenges do trans and non-binary people face, but I feel like we can't talk about women and programming for women without being really intentional about who we mean and being really expansive and inclusive about who we're talking to and who we're teaching. And trans and non-binary folks have a especially hard set of challenges in an aggressively gender binary space. I've had a few trans men take my class who are housed on the women's units. So I wanted to kind of touch down on that a little bit. But my primary goal is to think about this last one. So how can we as Inside Out instructors provide intentional programming for women and gender minority folks? I think I'll go through this kind of slide by slide. I like to have visuals on a chat like this so that we're not all just looking at each other's heads. And then when I get through this, we can look at each other and we can have a conversation about any part of it. I'm happy to respond or develop any of these points, and I'm really, really interested in hearing what you all have to say about them. So who are the women in our jails and prisons? To some of you who have been teaching in jails and prisons for a while, this isn't surprising. You probably use the same material in your classes, but it's useful to me, I think, to just talk about who are we talking about. This is from the Prison Policy Initiative. They update this chart about every year, so it's usually pretty up to date. This is 2024 data. And you can see this is, if I were to compare the overall prison population with this pie chart that is just women in the system, you'd see that it looks a little bit different, right? Women are disproportionately held in local jails. women have high levels of rates of not being yet convicted, right? 60% of women who are in local jails aren't convicted of a crime yet. This speaks to the massive amounts of poverty that we can associate with those who are incarcerated. In my first slide, you might have noticed this image that I had here. I want to maybe say at this point that when I talk about women and when I talk about gender, I don't think that we can ever fully prize gender apart from all sorts of other identity factors that go into the makeup of who we are, right? So that intersectionality teaches us that at the intersection of identity categories emerge new forms of harm. And that's certainly something that the prison industrial system kind of shouts out to us as well, right? So that when we say, how come there are so many people, women who are not incarcerated or not convicted? We know it's because there are high rates of poverty among those who are incarcerated. When we say, why do women's pathways to crime lead through drug addiction and mental health issues? Why are property crimes and nonviolent crimes more common among women? We can kind of lean back to a story of high rates of trauma experience and low public programming that has helped women and girls to work through those issues. So we see we see that impacted in the criminal justice system. It's terrifying to me to think that the rates of women in the U.S. criminal justice system have risen relative to men, right? Even when we see rates of decline overall, those rates of women in the system as a percentage of the total population of prisons has been rising. So between 1980 and 2022, the number of women serving has increased by almost 600%, right? And even if we notice the blip that we saw during COVID, the rebound effect of that has been up 18% between 2020 and 2022, right? So when we tell a story, as James Foreman recently did in a New York Times article about juvenile justice incarceration rates, we get a kind of skewed picture if we look at the overall trends downwards, because in fact, the rates of incarceration for girls relative to those boys in the system are increasing. I want us to be careful about that in our understanding of who is incarcerated and why. This is just a slice of the pie when we look at girls who are in the juvenile justice system. And this chart that I want to share with you comes out of James Foreman Jr.'s New York Times article, showing an overall pattern, right? An overall trend down with this kind of unexplainable little blip right here, which kind of coincides with COVID. But the rates for girls relative to boys have increased. And even in an article that is kind of neutral about the juvenile justice system, the only mention of girls was a mention of a girlfriend of one of the boys who is focused on in the article, right? So I feel like at all levels, we tend to leave girls and women out of the conversation. This, of course, is not true for the majority of the people who are on this call, but maybe it's a good reminder to us that that this is what we probably are all finding ourselves up against. Among women who are incarcerated, we know that 60% overall are mothers. Among the folks who are incarcerated in jails, that number is about 80%. And boy, does that hold true in the classes that I teach. Mothering, parenting, worry about losing access to children. Those are all really prominent issues that come up in my classes. Lastly, on the issue of who we're talking about, I wanted to just add this one additional slide, and this is focused on youth. This is something that I look at with my class. This is percentages of those who are detained in juvenile justice centers. About 3.2% of boys who enter those facilities self-identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. About almost 40% of girls who are in the juvenile justice system identify in that under that heading. Trans and non-binary is not included in this study. That's separate data. So this is particularly those who identify along a sexual minority track. And this pie chart is even more glaring in what it tells us of LGBT and gender non-binary, or sorry, let's see what this says because my screen is being blocked by a Zoom. But at any rate, on this chart, we see that of that 40%, almost 40% of girls in the juvenile justice system who identify as LGB, a full 85% are youth of color. So that's a story that we need to unpack a little bit. I'm sorry, I just you're probably all seeing that I've knocked myself out of my slideshow. Here we go. All right, so what does it mean to say that jails and prisons were designed for men? This is something that I hope maybe we can think about a little bit more in our conversation together. Certainly the physical spaces of jails and prisons tend to be spaces that were set up with either I can have neutral clientele or a male or masculine clientele. Many jails and prisons have a pod system that doesn't allow women to interact in other spaces in the jail. They're very much confined to their own specific unit. They may not have opportunities for jobs like runners that would give them some small amount of money while they're in the system. A lot of the women in our unit complain that all of the jobs go to men and very few of them go to women. They're often supervised by men. That was true of our unit for a long time until there was a PREA case, and now I haven't seen a male CEO in quite some time on our unit, but that used to be pretty much the standard. Gendered pathways are notably different for men and for women, in part because trauma is so much a part of the story of women and girls who end up incarcerated, and that is underlying so much of what I want us to talk about and think about today. As I said, motherhood is a key part of the story for women who are incarcerated. Women are the vast majority of those who are primary caregivers for children. In our jails, they're probably a lot less likely to get visits because men get visits from their kids because the moms take them in, and women often aren't visited by family members because there just aren't people there to bring them in. They face a likelihood of losing custody. I wanted to think a little bit about the stigma and expectations around jails and prisons as being kind of default for men. And on kind of both of these points, I wanted to read two passages from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, Women in Prison Seeking Justice Behind Bars. This was published about 4 years ago. First of all, on the issue of gendered pathways, they wrote this: examining the data on women in prison, research studies posit that the increase in the number of incarcerated women is a result of more expansive law enforcement efforts and stiffer drug sentencing laws, for example, mandatory minimums, especially for low-level offenses. According to one study, since the only means of avoiding a mandatory penalty is generally to cooperate with the prosecution by providing information on higher-ups in the drug trade, women who have a partner who is a drug seller may be aiding that seller, but have relatively little information to trade in exchange for a more lenient sentence. Hence, women are often less likely to be in a position to offer information to police in exchange for less prison time than their male counterparts. Once inside, stigmas associated with them lead to limitations and disciplinary infractions. Our primary finding was that although female inmates are less likely than their male counterparts to act violently in prison, the vast majority of states, in the vast majority of states, women in prisons receive a disproportionate number of disciplinary tickets for lower level offenses. Things like being disruptive, being insolent, disobeying orders, cursing, altering clothing. women are also more likely to receive harsher punishments for these infractions. I had a woman a few years ago who was pregnant and for a really tiny little infraction ended up in the hole for 2 weeks, went into early labor, hadn't had things set up for where her baby was going to go after the baby was born because she came so early. The baby went to the father stopped returning calls. She just simply could not contact because she couldn't get a hold of where her baby was after this. So there are real consequences to the kinds of stigmatization that women experience when they're incarcerated. What kinds of issues might we think about with trans and non-binary folks? I mentioned a moment ago that I think of the prison system as aggressively gender binary, right? There's very little understanding of the liminal spaces in prisons as being places where folks who are trans or identify as non-binary have to survive and have to navigate a space that is uh, really only set up for women or men. The Trump administration promises more hardship in this way. I included a headline here: Judge orders Trump administration to return 2 transgender inmates to women's prisons. This is still playing out in the courts, and I expect it will be for quite some time. Trans women who have been in women's prisons being forced to be rehoused according to assignment at birth, the kinds of challenges that trans women and trans men faced by the kinds of stigmatization. One of my trans men talked about nurses giving him shots of testosterone in the wrong part of his body, like not using wrong pronouns. Guards who talk to the whole group as ladies, things that are intended to be exclusionary. This last image at the bottom I think speaks to a kind of comment that you hear about why we can't include trans women on units, the kind of expectation that, well, that this is going to cause a chaos that we can't handle in our system. All right, so now landing on the bigger question of the day, right? What can we, if we're trying to be intentional about it, do to increase programming for women and gender minority folks? I have a bunch of questions here, right? I'm happy to talk through them together with you. I'm happy to tell you the kinds of things that I've done. But I suspect, given the just the lovely group that we have assembled today, this is really going to be a meeting of the minds, that there are lots of different kinds of programming that you all have done, and we can think about it by putting our heads together. I've kind of separated this into 2, right? Thinking about what kinds of inside out programs are currently being taught in women's jails and prisons. So maybe some of you can speak to those. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the kinds of issues that I cover in my own class. How and where can we expand on this? I was especially intrigued by a couple of you who said you're looking to expand into women's facilities, or hadn't really ever thought about teaching in a women's facility, but now are open to that and seeing how important it is to do that. What kinds of new programming can we come up with? And then I also have thought about the Inside Out program itself as something that has been over the years. Maybe by default, right, 90% of the people who are incarcerated are men. To Romy's point, the idea of thinking about the mass incarceration system as most impactful for Black and Brown men certainly is. How can we intentionally think about this as a space for understanding the impacts on women as well? So from thinking about whether we can have greater representation on our website, whether we can think about training sessions that are gender specific, whether we can encourage new kinds of think tanks. I noted on the program that there are 2 women's think tanks, one in Australia, so I haven't been able to get to that one, one in West Virginia. Thinking about can we bring more formerly incarcerated women into training other training people. I think about the Inside Out conference last November. I think about the number of Inside Out formerly incarcerated inside students who have become involved in teaching. And my experience with all of them has, they've all been men. So thinking about what are the ways in which, right, both at the level of us all teaching our classes, but also at the level of thinking about, well, what can Inside Out do? I'm going to stop screen sharing now. And now I'm going to sit back, and this is the part of the day that I've been most interested in. I would love to hear from all of you kind of what sorts of programs you have done, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what challenges have you encountered that I haven't mentioned here. I'd be happy to facilitate hearing from some of you. I'm also happy to answer any questions as well.
Before you,
And one other thing before I let you go is that I wanted to mention, Carolyn, I went to Bucknell as an undergrad. We didn't have Inside Out when I was there, but I was really interested in Muncie. I remember I went and took pictures for a photography class, and I just got shushed away from guards by the guards there who wanted to take my film out of my camera. I also worked with some women serving life sentences through a correspondence program during COVID when I couldn't go inside to our program. So we may even have some overlap in who we've encountered there.
Yeah,
Tara,
wonderful to hear. Thanks for mentioning it.
before you start, could you put that link in the chat?
I thought that I had, but I will put it in again. Oh, you know what? I did it accidentally in response to a private message that I received from Anne. So I'll do it I'll send the chat to
For everybody. Okay,
figure out how to do that.
thank you.
Yes, sorry about that. So Anne, you were the sole owner of that chat link, that link for a moment.
I thought I was special.
So I can go. Thank you so much, Tara. So much of what you said just resonated with what's been my first experience. And the students are pre-trial. Yeah, which does, that does have some challenges for sure. And so I'm exploring maybe I'm really enjoying it, but that's presents some challenges. So maybe looking into some post-trial, whether that population might have a little more stability. I guess one contribution maybe that I can make is I tried to find a book for the course, and I really love this book, Inside This Place, Not of It. And each chapter is a woman who spent a significant period of time in prison story. And the appendix has, like, for me as a law teacher, has a lot of legal information, like what are the laws that we're talking about. And yeah, it's
know
been,
that book, but I haven't looked at it in a while. Do you know, what year is it?
I think originally it came out in like 2014, and then it had a reissue. I'm sorry.
It was reissued. So it would have up-to-date laws in the.
I think so. Most recently, it looks like 2017. So that's all for now.
I don't use a specific book. I'm interested in that as well. I have a ton of books on my shelf next to me. I tend to give articles each week. So the way I run my class, I have a different unit each week. I teach a class. My class is called Women in the U.S. Criminal Justice System. My topics are, we start with war on drugs. We talk about gendered pathways. We combine that with thinking about coercion and also the ways in which women are portrayed in the media. We do a lesson where we rewrite the stories of those women who are told in ways that think about them as bad mothers and kind of sexist tropes, and we rewrite those stories. We look at pregnancy and motherhood, where we do an activity that involves imagining an advocacy group for women, because I try not to just get bogged down. And every week we could leave the class outraged. So I try to orient it around ways that we can think positively without contributing to a system that is just holding people down. So for the pregnancy and motherhood, I ask them to imagine that they're creating an advocacy group, and I give them each a particular kind of mother who they're advocating for, and they write a mission statement. They think about who the stakeholders would be, come up with a title. I do a unit on juvenile justice. We consider the trans identity and experiences of incarceration for another week. We look into healthcare for a week. We look at re-entry that's coming up this week, restorative justices. I think finding a book would be another way to go about doing that. I've found it, just given the fact that I've got students coming and going all the time. I do a specific unit each week on something that's related to women in the criminal justice system. I personally tend to have a ton of students who are women's gender and sexuality studies background, so they're bringing a lot of theory with them and able to talk about kind of some of the background issues that help the inside students kind of process through the lived experiences that they can bring to class. That's been the way that I've organized it, but I know there are 100 different ways to organize it. Has anybody else tackled some other ways of approaching the material? Are there other ideas about the kinds of topics that you've found relevant and interesting? Anything that's been a particular challenge? Oh, I see. And while you think about answering that, I'm going to just pop over it. It looks like I might have to give permission to access.
Yeah, I think you have to change the privacy settings in Google.
Yeah.
A little bit of a pain. But well, this was a great presentation. I was just going to say that I taught in a women's, it wasn't in prison, it was a residential work release facility.
Okay.
And we read the book by Wally Lamb. That's a collection of narratives. I forgot what it's called. Somebody will know or Google it quickly. But it's a collection of narratives written by women in a prison in Connecticut. And for the final project, the women in the class decided they wanted to do their own book. Yes. And so I mean, I don't have it with me because I'm in an office. That's not where my stuff is, but we wrote our own book, and each of the women in the class wrote a narrative about whatever they wanted. We had outside and inside, like in a prison. And so that was kind of a cool project.
That sounds fantastic. I really love that idea. I've been doing every other semester a creative project, or I've been working on a resource guide. My creative project this semester, we're doing a zine, but I really love the idea of longer pieces and writing about story. So much of the way I approach the class is through story and thinking about uplifting the voices of people who have a story to tell. So we spend an awful lot of time, right? It's intentional that early in the semester we're rewriting stories that are told from a kind of sexist perspective. And then thinking about when we examine trans identities and think about the experiences of those who are incarcerated. I don't want to put into anybody's mouth what it's like to be trans in a system like this. I've had a few really generous students who have been trans themselves and have talked about their experiences while incarcerated. But that doesn't happen every semester. That's just been a couple of times. That also made me think more about the experiences of folks who are trans men. And I had always focused on the experiences of trans women in carceral settings. But I love the idea of taking the Wally Lamb book and doing something that emulates that and gives everybody a chance to write a story from the perspective that they experience it. That's a really nice project. I really love that. I think I might steal that.
meant to be stolen. And the other thing about it is that we really worked on them over the last few weeks of the semester, and I made them do peer review. And we had one of the women in the work release whose literacy skills were really very compromised. And so she dictated her story to one of the outside students. I don't call them inside and outside when I'm in a setting like that, but we call them campus and community students. But anyway, and so the campus student actually typed up the story for that woman and went in the book. And, that woman was just like, I've never seen anyone so thrilled that she was included and that she had, been able to tell her story.
That's lovely. I've noticed, just anecdotally that my inside students are so supportive of one another. I had a student this semester before last who said she was going to have trouble with the readings because she said she has a lot of reading disabilities. And the other inside students said, "Oh, Rosa, we're going to read it to you." And she loved poetry. And one of our outside students would come into class every day having memorized a poem to recite to Rosa. And then we included all of those poems in the zine at the end of the semester. It was one of the things that's really like fascinating, valuable to me is to see the way in which the community gets developed inside. There's so much support and so much kind of like the development of a kind of kinship structure, looking out for one another and just propping each other up.
Yeah. Poetry slams are another one of my favorite inside out activities, and I do one every semester. And we do a little chap book at the end with everybody's poem, and somebody in the class makes a cover, designs a cover. It's usually an inside student. We always have inside students with really amazing artistic abilities. But Anne has had her hand up, so
Anne, go ahead, Anne.
One of the schools that we work with is Swarthmore, and recently they were teaching women in the Philadelphia jail system. And instead of doing the usual inside out project, they worked towards doing a simulation for their particular class, and also were able to invite some other students. I'm not exactly sure what kind of group that was, but it involved the inside and the outside students, and everyone had a fun time. And the prison was also amazed to the point now they want to think about doing it more. But this one was specifically focused on women and women's issues, as well as reentry. It was all tied together. But I thought it was a really effective way to look at the issues and actually have an action-packed event that people had fun with.
So can you describe that a little bit more when you say that you did work towards a simulation? What was it?
It seems very popular, at least in this area, and my guess is it's around the country now, but simulations are usually focused on reentry, and it's a chance to have participants come and actually, quote unquote, walk in the shoes of someone who's reentering. And you go to a table that's set up as probation. You go to a table that's set up as drug assessment. You go to a table that's set up as jail, because when you're outside, you have to do all these different things, and you might not do it right, and you might get thrown in jail again. A little aside, we also did a workshop on that with Inside Out with a group of reentering women that we worked with who were on the outside, a group called Why Not Prosper. So it's effective on the inside and the outside, but I thought it was particularly interesting that the prison approved it, that they liked it, that they want to do it, and the women loved it.
Yeah. Do you think, is that a prison that just seems generally supportive of your endeavors, or was this a step outside of what they would normally do?
The administration has changed so much in the past couple of years. I'm not really sure how to answer that, but I will give one example. And they've been pretty easy on getting students in and out of the facility. I'm talking about the outside students. But all of a sudden this semester, there have been big to-dos with the outside students, who are generally all women, and issues of too much jewelry and piercings. And to the level, though, that I've never experienced, and I've done some prison work over the past couple of decades, but to the point where the officers and the administrators who came down too were forcing or wanted to force the outside women students to take out their piercings, some of which couldn't. And then they thought it was done on purpose. And it just got into this huge and horrible situation where class was canceled that day and they had to, we all actually got involved in it. So I don't know, that was, the tension is there, the stress is there, but the simulation seems to be a way to get around some of that stuff.
That's interesting. I always find it interesting when my students encounter that kind of control. It's one of the ways in which they see control of body, right? We've had students who have had clothing challenged, or we haven't had jewelry challenged, but the few that have, it's really, we had one student who was a student of color. It seemed as if she was challenged particularly because of the type of body shape that she had, right? So it is its own lesson about the levels of control around women's bodies that so many of our Insight students face regularly. Yeah. Coraline, I'm sorry, Coraline.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I'm appreciating both the presentation and the discussion. I just wanted to share a couple things that I did back in the day in terms of projects in my classes at the State Correctional Institution at Muncie, and then share something about an initiative that we've just started in PA that we're trying to get going related to an associate's degree for women incarcerated here. So the two projects that we did, I only thought of one of them because you were talking about simulation. And there was one year that we did a play in 3 iterations as our final project. And they were all sort of different approaches to doing time and what the outcomes can be of doing time in different ways. And so it was kind of the same person with the same backstory entering prison and making decisions while in prison that kind of led off in different directions. And that was a really fun thing. And the inside and outside students played different roles than their actual situated identities in the prison. And that created a lot of fun, I would say. And we actually recorded it, I think, somehow too.
Wow.
Forgot about that. Oh, yeah, because there was at the time going to be a possibility that they would use it for kind of like orientation for women coming in.
Okay.
I doubt that ever happened. But and then the other thing that we did, and I'm not sure this would be possible anymore, but one year we did a kind of 3-way writing exchange between the inside students, the outside students, and girls at a girls locked facility that was in the same general community. And it was a lot to set up and a lot to move those writings around, but they commented on one another's. They had the same prompts and commented on one another's work in a way that was, I think, for the adult women who were incarcerated, having the opportunity to kind of speak to young women who are at kind of critical points in their lives, and having the Bucknell students kind of in the mix was really interesting too. And I think that the younger women who are incarcerated, not incarcerated, but in this locked facility, the girls, you know, it was very special for them. And to have anybody paying attention to them at all, basically. So that was a kind of fun out of the box thing where I think like several of you have mentioned storytelling, right? And how that seems to maybe be particularly valuable in for incarcerated people incarcerated in women's prisons. And then the other thing that I wanted to share is that one of the difficulties in getting women access to higher education who in carceral settings is that, unlike at least some men who can kind of follow the opportunity by being shifted to another prison setting, there are so few women's prisons that women usually don't have that opportunity. So they can't start their education in one facility and move to another facility to continue their education for the most part. And so on the committee that Ashley's leading, we started talking about the idea of collaboratively across higher ed institutions putting together an associate's degree that would be offered at this women's prison in Pennsylvania. And we had a first meeting about it, and it looks very hopeful, in fact, that we can cobble together kind of one college's certificate, and on top of that, add another opportunity that comes out of another college that would lead toward an associate, making room for inside out classes to be a part of the kind of the options, the elective options in the program. That would be a human services and restorative justice associate's degree. And so, you know, in a sense, it's early days, but it's pretty amazing that there are a set of people who are kind of positioned to hopefully make it possible, at least, and a principal at Muncie who's very motivated to get an associate's degree in there. And so it could be that the stars will align and we'll be able to do it. And that would be, I think, a really big step forward in educational access for incarcerated women and non-binary people in women's prisons in Pennsylvania. So I'm kind of excited about that right now.
That sounds terrific. You know, I was thinking as you were talking about how in the field of WGSS, we're really not disciplinary in our focus, we're interdisciplinary. And so I think really kind of used to thinking about coalition building and not having proprietary rights over one particular field. And I've thought about that in our area as well. We have a coalition of a number of different colleges. So far, nothing in place to bring those various different colleges together, but it seems like a kind of model where sharing knowledge and sharing across those different colleges, putting into place this particular certificate program or that particular certificate program in the interest of providing some kind of a higher ed, some kind of access to higher ed that one college can't do. Like one of the challenges that I have, and I'm sure that Bucknell is probably a similar kind of school. I don't think that there's any interest at Lafayette in trying to create any kind of degree program or any kind of like credit for the class. But joining forces, right, if there was something that was in place that was bigger than just one particular college, whether it's being able to get a degree across those colleges or some kind of a certificate program, just we don't need to be siloed in any of these ways. And I think that would be especially valuable for women's programs that have those kinds of physical limitations, where there just are so many fewer of them. Yeah. Would anybody else want to share any of the kinds of programs that you're doing, or any of the kinds of challenges that you've faced? Anybody who's just sort of starting up a program and have specific challenges that come through that? I'm not used to encountering an inside out space that's quiet. Catherine, go ahead.
Sorry, a little bit of diversion here, but I just want to acknowledge the long-termers and the lifers, because I do engage with them over the years, the last 18 years or so since I've been here in the States. And I just want to share something. It's another little project. It's a lifelong project, but I have a completed book, manuscript at this moment, and it has several women from Muncie, also Texas and Ireland and Australia, that have been incarcerated for violent crimes. Well, murder is an example. And I just want to acknowledge it's all in the process, and it's like I'm writing a trilogy, and the next group of women will be those serving time that have sexually offended. I'm bringing this to just a general discussion here, is that it's very interesting when you present this proposal to, shall we say, publishers beyond academia. One disheartening part is that, if you're not sensationalizing the women's criminality, then really sort of it's like, well, what is in it for us? And also just if the women like that Wally Lamb, I mean, I've got the book, I've had it for a few years, women sharing their life stories, and that's what I have, these women that are serving life and life without parole. But I just want to share, it's always a challenging piece of working with this cohort, which I love, absolutely love doing. But it's so sad to see that it's like it gets excited, but then when you say, well, no, I'm actually going to provide a platform for the women serving these long to life sentences, for them to share the background or their pathway or their life, or the trauma that they were exposed to. And I just want to just put it out there as a general piece, is that from my perspective of working in the realm for many years, it's just it's frustrating at times, because I also see agents that they want to work, or anyone, if you're doing a narrative nonfiction manuscript, and it's what is it? We're interested in feminist or social justice or women's rights, and the minute that you approach it, and it's like there's a little bit of a lack of interest. They put it out there that they're really interested, but unless you're going down certain paths about the women's criminality, sometimes it's a little bit of a tough sell, which is really sad. So I just want to share that with everyone for what it's worth. But I have a manuscript done. I'm about to write a second book, and then there'll be a third, but a trilogy of these women that are incarcerated for the violent crimes. So they're special to my heart. Not many people will say that, but they are special to my heart. So thank you. And can I say hi, Anne? Yes, I do remember you. Hello. Thank you. That's all I just want to put out there for those women that we seem to leave behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So I appreciate you speaking up for the women who have committed more serious crimes, and similarly to the men who have committed more serious crimes, those are the ones that people have a really hard time caring about, listening to, wanting to learn about. And I was going to say something about my current women. What was it? Oh, no, it wasn't about my current women. It's about the men. When I teach the male inside students or at the male facility, there is such disdain, both from inside and outside students, for any crime. I mean, any crime against children, but I'll call them peds. It's just, you can't even start a conversation about that with I find that I can't even start a conversation about that, despite all my efforts of, trying to be open-minded. That's the one area that nobody seems willing to go.
All I'm going to say is that I hear you, because I find that because a lot of the women over the years, and even here in Pennsylvania, more so than Texas, that I've, they've written their stories, and I'm like this platform for them. A larger cohort are women that have abused their children or killed their children, etc. But it's just one of those areas that, yeah, we want to learn about it, but then sometimes we really don't. So I'm just wanting to acknowledge this cohort of women from around the world, literally, that they are forgotten in many ways. Thank you. Anyway.
I appreciate both of those comments, because I actually have tried in my class to bring those women's stories in as well. So I started doing a unit on life sentences when I was working with the women at Muncie, and that's because they were serving life sentences, right? So I I wanted to think about like how we thought about long sentences, how we thought about use of time. And I used Lori Beck's Lempert's book, Women Doing Time. And then I continued using that when I was able to go back in after COVID into my space, because it's really, to me, really fascinating to think about the way in which the women who I'm dealing with, who are all on short bids, but often many, many, many of them in a row, right? So I have students who have maybe been incarcerated for 10, 15 times, and they just simply cannot imagine the length of time that's involved, right? They just can't imagine it. And they're often quite judgmental, as you, right, the way you were, as what you and Romy were both talking about, but in ways that I'm really trying in the class to challenge, right? These tropes that we fall back on as the bad mother, the monstrous woman, right? The Madonna whore complex, the idea that like women are going against their nature to be doing crimes. That's a masculine thing to do, right? Like all of these organizing principles in our society that's like simply fail the imagination when it comes to thinking about women in those spaces. And I find so often that women themselves are really critical of other women along those same lines, even when they, a strategy of resistance can be a mirroring strategy where you think about the way in which we idealize mothers who are nurturing and caring and would do anything for their children. That gets challenged in a society where we label as deviant certain mothers who can't live up to that, or right through dint of being constantly surveilled are more likely to be criminalized for their actions, right? But that among those women, the thinking about themselves as good mothers who were stealing so that they can buy diapers, or who are serving time with the goal of getting back to their children, or right. So thinking about themselves not in a way that rejects or challenges or criticizes this dominant discourse around motherhood, but rather actually embraces it. And I guess what is a long roundabout way of getting back to saying that a lot of the women who are serving short sentences are quite critical of those who are serving longer sentences, because they embrace the dominant discourse around the evilness of women who would, especially women who would commit crimes against their children. And I've had to adapt certain exercises that I used to do. I used to read an essay that was published in The Guardian about Myra Hindley, who committed crimes against children along with her male partner, Ian Brady. And I would read this really kind of mournful, reflective piece about whether you can have remorse and whether you can be reformed. And she got a degree from the Open University while she was incarcerated. And we have pictures of her looking like, like the mugshot of her is a famous picture where she looks kind of Marilyn Monroe-ish. But then there are these pictures of her looking kind of grandmotherly in the jail too. And I've had to leave out the fact that her murders were of children, and if I want my students to engage with the story at all. And then I read this really interesting piece and we all engage with it we have a circle discussion around it. And then at the end, I just kind of casually mentioned, well, this is the crime she was actually there for. And and the response to that is often like, wow, I'm glad I didn't know that when I was first reading this. It just kind of puts a veil between the ability to engage with the humanness of the women there. So I appreciate the comments, thinking about the ways in which gender shapes those attitudes towards like kind of carves out as less important, or like not the right women to be dealing with. And think if we're engaged in how do we teach to and about and for women, those stories are really have to be centered. Yeah.
Tara, thank you. I'm just saying thank you everyone for that. And I will Laura, I'll send details of other things that I'm doing regarding this cohort. It might be easy if that suits.
It'd be great. I love
to
it.
do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you. Just want to give a coo out to those women.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Catherine, can you put some of that information in the chat? So do we have any more questions, thoughts, insights that want to be shared?
Hi, so I couldn't raise my hand, but I would like to speak. So I am justice impacted. I actually did 4 years in SEI Muncie. And I know Coralyn and Ann know my story a little bit, but when I was incarcerated, I wasn't able to get higher education due to there being programming inside the facility that I had to do first. So I wasn't able to do that. So when I got out, I ended up going to Penn College and getting my degree. But what I wanted to touch on was hearing how the Inside Out program it works, and it is geared towards all type of populations, whether it be like depending on the crime. It's so trauma informed, like, and you guys try to keep everybody like, I want to say, on a level playing field, and it's trauma informed, and I love it. So what I wanted to say was this. Well, I'm interested in doing something of the Inside Out program, and that's why I reached out to Coralyn. But I wanted to possibly bring up a new topic because as I was listening about um, individuals doing long sentences and having these crimes, maybe having a topic geared towards like doing hard time productively, as that being the topic, and then understanding like the years, like you know how we break up our years in projects, like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, giving that type of goal inside that topic. But that's just a thought. I don't know where it's gonna go, but I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to this. I don't know, I'm truly inspired, and I love hearing all of this, and I'm here, and I'm willing to participate.
Thank you, Ashley. I actually would love to talk with you more because I'm really interested, being somebody from Pennsylvania, to hear more. Like, I'd love to talk with you and Coralyn both about the work that you do in Pennsylvania on the Higher Ed and Prison Consortium. So maybe that's something that we can connect about too. Do you have an email address that you could drop in the chat?
So Catherine, the book that, I mean, the information that you gave us is for the first book that you mentioned?
First, yeah, and I'm just going through an agent at this moment, so I'm sorry it sounds sort of vague. And the second book will be women that are incarcerated serving sentences for sexually offending, and then the third's going to be about women that actually do the sex trafficking. So it's a bit of a trilogy, and it's been a bit of a few years coming, but again, it's not hard work. But I'll let you know through Inside Out as well, when things do happen. But I just wanted to say thank you to Tara, if I may. And also, it's a little bit ironic, and I met Laurie and many years ago, and as I said, I'm still here, that the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre that was shown on your PowerPoint was the first prison I entered. And in the book I'm writing, there were some women in there for murder who now have all been released after 21, 23 years. But it was at the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre. So very interesting. And also, Tara, you mentioned very briefly about the environment where the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, and some of you may know this, it was very much made, or the buildings or the grounds itself, from a therapeutic, a female, more feminine perspective, in the sense that there are little cottages there, there are homes there that, 2 or 3 bedrooms that the women look after themselves. So very much that therapeutic model. But I just wanted to share that. It was a little bit ironic and wonderful to see, but that was where I started about 20 years ago, my work with women inside or serving long sentences. But the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, I won't say a wonderful prison, but a better than some, put it that way, if I may say, better than some for women anyway that are incarcerated. So thank you, and I thank you all. Thanks.
Yeah,
Cheers.
that is so interesting. Yeah, I think that there's so little interest in making jails and prisons habitable places, but to me, it seems like it just makes so much sense to think about architecture and to think about the geography of prison, and to think specifically, right, about what makes something feminine versus masculine, a space, and thinking about architecture as corrective. Not, I don't mean corrective in the sense of a corrective institute, but thinking about as countering some of the challenges that we have. That's so interesting to me that you were there. Thanks for sharing that.
Catherine, what's the name of that prison?
It is the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, after Dame Phyllis Frost. And again, I said goodbye, but I'll say last thing. Isn't this ironic? When I went there years ago, and two of the women were serving a 21, both were serving 23 years for murder. Now, the women, as we know, in the United States will probably be serving a life or life without parole. But these two women, I went back years later, and they were to come up, they would say come out at 21 for parole. Both these women, because of the facilities that they were living in the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, and this is going back about 10 years ago, they said they wanted to max out at 23. Now, I have never heard that before, but they wanted to max out at 23, not 21 years when it came up, because as they shared with me, they had a home there. They had their room, they'd order their food, they had a kitchen, bedrooms. One of them was an artist, and they actually called it in front of the officers the Love Shack. So the both of them then became an item. And again, the grandchildren would come and visit. Again, it was like, and they maxed out at 23 years. And yet they could have come out at 21. So again, different environment and facility, but that was the Dame Phyllis. So I just want to share a little bit of past history there. And again, thank you, because I could talk on and on about this all the time, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm happy if there are other questions or comments, but if we're winding down, and also that seems great. I really appreciate this. I was really interested to hear from some of you, and it didn't disappoint. So thanks so much.
Great stuff, Tara. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, let's give her a hand.
Thank you.
Okay, and our next Zoom is in a couple of weeks, I think. So be looking for, an announcement about that.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks for
All
making
right.
these happen.
Mhm.